Hello, everyone, and welcome. Now, think about this for a second. Every single time you type a web address into your browser, you're interacting with a kind of hidden government. It doesn't have an army, it doesn't have borders, but it creates rules that affect literally every single one of us. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this digital governor, an organization that is, believe it or not, a private company that somehow wields global power. It seems like a pretty straightforward question, doesn't it? Who really governs the internet? But the answer is, well, it's profoundly complex. The system you and I use every day is this strange hybrid, something that completely blurs the lines between a simple Californian nonprofit and a sovereign nation. So let's start peeling back those layers. So here's our roadmap for this discussion. We'll kick things off with the big picture of internet governance. Then we'll zero in on our main subject, ICANN. From there, we'll unpack the central paradox that lies at its heart, look at it through two clashing legal lenses, examine some absolutely fascinating real-world court cases, and then wrap up by exploring a new frontier in global law. Okay, let's dive right in. The first thing you have to understand is that there is no single king of the internet. It's not a kingdom. It's much more like a galaxy, a whole constellation of different bodies, and each one has a very specific job to do. You know, you've got these UN-affiliated bodies like the ITU that host big diplomatic talks. You have technical groups that manage the pools of IP addresses. But in the middle of all these players, one organization sits in a uniquely powerful and absolutely critical position. And that organization is ICANN, the entity that manages the Internet's master address book, the domain name system. So let's really focus in on ICANN. Its main job is to make sure that when you type google.com into your browser, your computer finds its way to the right server, no matter if you're in Tokyo or Toronto. It doesn't control the content on the internet, but it controls the addresses. You can think of it as the global dispatcher for all web traffic. Now, on paper, its role is purely technical. It's about coordination. It manages the unique identifiers that allow one single global interoperable internet to even exist. But that technical role comes with an absolutely immense amount of power. ICANN's decisions determine what can even exist as a web address, from .com to country codes like .de for Germany. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. For most of its life, ICANN was actually under a direct contract with the US government. But this date, October 1st, 2016, that was supposed to be its Independence Day. The contract expired, and ICANN officially became a multi-stakeholder organization. So what does that mean? It means it's supposed to be governed by a diverse global community of businesses, governments, academics, you name it. But did it really truly leave US jurisdiction behind? And this is where our central paradox really kicks in. And this brings us right to the core of our analysis today. This deep structural tension between what ICANN is, legally, which is just a simple corporation, and what it does globally, which is act like a regulator for the entire planet. Let's break this down, because it's pretty wild when you stop and think about it. On the one hand, if you look at the law, ICANN is just a nonprofit based in California. It has to follow US law, and you can sue it in a US court. Simple enough. But in effect, in reality, it's a global regulatory body. Its decisions can challenge the sovereignty of entire nations. Just let that sink in for a moment. A private company with public global power. So to really get our heads around this, we have to put on two different pairs of legal glasses, so to speak. One pair is from the world of private corporate law. The other is from the world of public international law. And believe me, they see ICANN in completely different ways. And this table illustrates the problem perfectly. From a private law perspective, it's pretty clear-cut. ICANN is a California company, so US courts have the final word. But the glaring problem is that a single nation's laws are governing a global resource. Now, switch glasses. From a public international law perspective, ICANN exists in a complete legal vacuum. It wasn't created by a treaty between nations, so it's not technically bound by international law. And yet, its actions can impact everything from global trade to human rights. Now, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment for us law students. This legal conflict creates real, high-stakes international drama. So let's take a look at what actually happens when a US court is forced to rule on matters that are, for all intents and purposes, global politics. We're going to look at three cases that basically put this whole paradox on trial. Each one involves ICANN, a US courthouse, and a cast of really powerful international players, from governments and multinational corporations to, well, entire continents.
First up, the battle for the digital identity of an entire continent, the .africa domain. The question seemed simple enough. Who gets to control it? The answer? Well, it was anything but.
Okay, so here's the crucial point. You had one company competing against another company that happened to be backed by the African Union, an organization of 55 sovereign states. ICANN ultimately sided with the African Union's choice, so the other company sued. And where did this massive international political dispute get settled? In a courtroom in California based on U.S. contract law. The absurdity of that is just astounding. Next up, we've got a corporate titan versus a coalition of sovereign nations. And the prize they were all fighting over? A single, 7-letter word, .amazon. So here you had Amazon, the company, making its case for the domain based on its global brand. And on the other side, you had the Amazon Corporation Treaty Organization, countries like Brazil and Colombia, arguing that the name represents an irreplaceable piece of our planet's heritage. It was a classic showdown, private intellectual property versus public geopolitical identity. The outcome here was absolutely fascinating. ICANN gave the domain to the company, but, and this is a huge but, with a major string attached. Amazon had to commit to protecting the geopolitical interests of the Amazonian nations. And this is so significant because it shows ICANN being forced right before our eyes to basically invent new forms of global governance that blend public and private interests. This is law being created on the fly. Our final case today is perhaps the most explosive. It's about an attempt to seize the entire digital territory of a sovereign nation, Iran's .ir domain, to pay off a court judgment. So the plaintiffs, who were victims of terrorism, wanted to take control of Iran's country code to satisfy a U.S. civil judgment. ICANN fought back, arguing this would essentially weaponize the internet's plumbing, and the court agreed with them. Now, this decision was monumental. Had it gone the other way, it would have set a devastating precedent, opening the door for any country to try and seize the digital assets of its enemies. We could have seen a catastrophic splintering of the global internet. The U.S. court, without ever even mentioning international law, effectively saved the neutral, global nature of the DNS. So what do all these cases tell us? They show that our old legal boxes, private law over here, public international law over there, are breaking down. They just don't work for these powerful, borderless entities like ICANN. We need a new tool, a new framework. And that new tool might just be this: Global Administrative Law, or GALE. It's an emerging field of law that's built for this weird new world. It's not about writing new treaties between countries. It's about applying fundamental principles of good governance, like transparency, accountability, and reasoned decision-making to these powerful new global actors. The goal of GAL is pretty simple when you get down to it. It's about building legitimacy for this new kind of power. It's about making sure these new global governors operate out in the open, that everyone who's affected has a voice, and that their decisions can be challenged and reviewed in a meaningful way. Which leaves us with the final and most crucial question. As more and more of our world is run by these private, global entities, the challenge of accountability becomes one of the defining issues of our time. Who watches the watchers? The answer is still being written. And it's up to all of us to help shape it, to ensure that the future of our internet remains open, fair, and truly accountable to everyone.